A girl was forced to dance on a wire with her hands tied. What had happened next shocked the town. The air in the ramshackle circus tent was thick with the smells of desperation, false cheer, and simmering menace. Sawdust couldn't hide the scent of stale whiskey from the town's brutes. High above, Lila Monroe stood alone on the platform, her world narrowed to a single, slender rope, stretching into the lamplit gloom. Her hands, steady and sure, tested its tension. Professionalism was her only armor in this grim theater. But her eyes gave her away. They weren't focused on the wire. They were locked on the front row on Baron Augustus Thorne. He sat like a vulture in fine silk, his possessive gaze a physical weight. As Lila adjusted a buckle on her slipper, her sleeve slipped, revealing a pale puckered scar on her wrist. An old burn. A brand from another lifetime, from another man who thought he owned her. She quickly covered it. The ringmaster's voice boomed, but Lila only heard the Baron's low drawl to his companion, a chilling whisper that cut through the noise. A real high flyer, that one. A cruel smile touched his lips. Tell her tonight she dances for me. Without the net. The air in the Meadow's Edge traveling circus was a sour cocktail of scents. Stale popcorn, nervous sweat, and the cloying sweetness of rot-gut whiskey bleeding from the town's most prominent citizens. It was an atmosphere of forced cheer, a thin-painted smile stretched over a skull of desperation. This town, like all the others, was a place to be endured, a place to perform, collect the coins, and leave before the dust settled too deep in your soul. High above the sawdust-strewn floor, Lila Monroe stood on the lonely platform. Her world had shrunk to a single slender rope that sliced through the lamplit gloom, a silver path to a fleeting moment of grace. Lila. She turned. Barney Fitch, the ringmaster, stood behind her, his face a road map of worry. The sequins on his jacket were dull with grime, his smile as worn as the tent canvas. Just, be careful tonight, girl. He rasped his eyes, flicking nervously toward the seats of honor. Baron Augustus Thorne is in the house. The man owns everything in this valley, including the air we breathe. Don't catch his eye. Lila simply nodded her gaze, already distant. Understood, Barney. But it was too late. She had felt his stare the moment she stepped onto the platform, a cold, appraising gaze that stripped her down not as an artist but as a possession. Baron Thorne sat enthroned in the front row, a vulture in a velvet coat. He did not watch her. He surveyed her. The drums rolled. Barney announced her name. Lila stepped out onto the wire. For a few precious minutes she was free. The world fell away, leaving only the rope a razor's edge between the heavens and the hard-packed earth. Her body remembered the language of balance, a silent poetry of muscle and bone. But as she executed a slow, deliberate turn, her sleeve slipped. The heat of the lamps caught the pale, puckered skin of a scar on her wrist. An old burn, the brand of a long-dead ghost. The memory jolted her, and the wire trembled. She slammed the door on the thought, finishing her routine with flawless, cold precision. The applause was a hollow thunder. She took her bow, her eyes carefully avoiding the front row, and retreated. She was unhooking her safety line when one of the Baron's quiet men appeared. "The Baron requests your presence." It was an order wrapped in silk. She found him near the performer's exit, away from the dispersing crowd. He smiled, and it did not touch the chilling emptiness in his eyes. "Magnificent," he purred, his voice a low drawl. "Such form, such flexibility. A talent like yours is wasted in the dust of these pitiful towns." He stepped closer, his cologne rich and suffocating, invading her space. "I have a proposition for you. A more private stage awaits at my manor. A permanent engagement where your skills can be truly appreciated." His meaning was as clear and as dirty as a mud puddle. He wasn't offering her a job. He was offering her a gilded cage. Lila's blood ran cold, but her voice was level. "I am a performer baron, not property. My stage is the wire." The baron's smile tightened a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He had offered his prize, and the prize had refused. "Every creature has its price, my dear. Name yours." "My dignity," Lila said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "And it is not for sale." For a heartbeat there was only the shocked silence of a man who had never been denied. Then the mask of civility shattered. A low, ugly sound rumbled in his chest. His face, once smooth with feigned charm, contorted into a snarl of pure, venomous rage. He was not merely insulted. He was defied. Publicly, he would make her an example. "Very well." He spat the words dripping with ice. "If the wire is your stage, then you will prove your devotion to it. You have rejected my private generosity, so you will face my public judgment." He leaned in his voice a chilling whisper that promised a world of pain. "Tomorrow night, in front of this entire miserable town, you will perform for me. You will show them all what true folly looks like. You will perform without the net." The next morning, the sun rose, but its light brought no warmth to the Meadow's Edge traveling circus. A new chill had settled over the camp, a frost of fear that was colder than any dawn. The usual morning sounds, the cheerful shouts of the roustabouts, the laughter of the acrobats practicing their tumbles, the distant roar of the aging lion, were gone, replaced by hushed, urgent whispers that died whenever Lila passed. She had become a ghost in her own home, a walking omen. The other performers, her family forged in sawdust and sweat, now looked at her with a terrible mixture of pity and fear. Their eyes, once warm and familiar, skittered away from hers. She was a contagion, and the disease was defiance. The first visitation came just after noon. One of the Baron's quiet, imposing men appeared at the door of her small, cramped wagon. He did not knock. He simply materialized a pillar of dark wool and menace. He held out a long, flat box wrapped in paper. A gift. From the Baron, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. Lila didn't move. "I want nothing from him, he insists." The man placed the box on the steps. "He is a great admirer of beauty, and he detests seeing beautiful things. Broken." The words were a silken threat, a promise of the fate that awaited her should she continue to refuse. The man turned and walked away without another word, leaving the box behind like an unexploded bomb. With trembling fingers, Lila opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a length of the finest snow-white silk, a costume, or perhaps a shroud. She slammed the lid shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. The second blow fell an hour later. She saw the Baron's men surrounding the knife-thrower's tent. Marco, a man whose hands were as steady as stone, was arguing, his voice rising in panic. His wife, Elena, stood beside him, weeping silently. A few minutes later, a sign was hammered into the ground in front of their tent, closed. By order of Baron Thorne, unsafe for public exhibition. Barney Fitch found her by the deserted animal cages, his face the color of ash. They shut down the wheel of danger. He whispered, his voice shaking. Claimed the wood was rotten, a public hazard. He wrung his hands, his gaze darting around as if the Baron's spies were listening from the shadows. "He's doing it, Lila. He's taking us apart piece by piece. He'll ruin us all, because of you." The accusation born of his terror struck her harder than any physical blow. It was one thing to risk her own life. It was another to be the cause of her friend's ruin. She walked through the heart of the camp, a solitary island in a sea of fear. Marco and Elena sat on a crate, their life's work condemned by a single cruel whim. They did not look at her as she passed, but she felt the heat of their silent, desperate plea. The clowns, their painted smiles hidden for the day, watched her with somber eyes. They were all trapped on the same fragile wire she was, and she was the one making it shake. That evening, as dusk bled across the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, Barney came to her wagon. He looked 10 years older than he had the day before. The ringmaster was gone, leaving only a broken, desperate man. "Please, girl," he begged, his voice cracking. He gestured at the silent, darkened camp. "Look what he's doing. This is our life. For some of these folks, it's the only home they've ever known." Lila stared at the white silk box on her small table. "He wants to see me fall, Barney. He wants to see me broken or dead for his entertainment." "Then let him see you live." "Barney," cried, his voice raw. "What's one performance? You're the best there is. You can do it. It's just pride, Lila. Is your pride worth more than all of this? Is it worth more than our lives?" He left, leaving his question hanging in the suffocating air of the wagon. She was utterly alone now, the weight of a dozen lives, a dozen dreams resting on her shoulders. She looked at her own reflection in the small cracked mirror on the wall. The face that stared back was a stranger's, etched with a weariness that went bone deep. She saw the ghost of a girl from long ago, a girl who had once chosen silence, who had chosen survival over pride. And she remembered the price that had been paid. The memory, hot and searing as a brand, rose up within her. The choice was not about pride. It had never been about pride. It was about debt. A debt paid in fire, and screams a debt she had sworn to herself she would one day repay. The world outside Lila's wagon had fallen into a muted, fearful hush. The vibrant chaos of the circus had died, leaving behind the hollow sound of wind whipping against canvas and the distant, lonely cry of a coyote. Inside, the silence was louder. It was filled with the ghosts of Barney's pleading words, the accusing stares of her friends, and the suffocating presence of the box on her table. The white silk inside was not a gift. It was a cage waiting to be closed. Lila sat on her small, lumpy cot, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Her gaze was fixed on the box, but her eyes saw another time, another place. The smell of dust and despair in the air was suddenly replaced by the sweet scent of clover and wood smoke from a summer long past. The memory came unbidden, a tidal wave she had spent years trying to outrun. She was 16 again, a girl with starlight in her eyes and a boundless faith in the magic of the show. She was part of the Starlight Vagabonds, a small, hopeful troupe that felt more like a family than a business. Their leader, the heart of their little world, was Leo. He wasn't a ringmaster. He was a fire eater, an acrobat, a storyteller whose laughter was as bright and as wild as the flames he danced with. He was the one who had taken a scared, clumsy orphan and taught her the language of the high wire. "The wire never lies, Lila," he used to say, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It feels everything. Your fear, your joy, your hesitation. You can't fool it. So you must learn not to fool yourself." He was her brother, her mentor, her hero, and she had let him burn. The town had been prosperous, its foundations built on a recent silver strike, and its leader was Magistrate Croft, a man with soft hands, a hard smile, and the same possessive emptiness in his eyes that she now saw in Baron Thorne. Croft had become infatuated with Lila's act with her youth. The proposition had come after a show behind the main tent, his words like slugs crawling over her skin. He spoke of patronage, of taking her away from the common rabble, of giving her a life of comfort. She had frozen a deer in the glare of a hunter's lantern, her throat tight with terror. She had opened her mouth to stammer a reply, a refusal, a plea, she wasn't sure what. But she never got the chance. The lady's art is for the many, sir, not for the one, a voice warm and steady had cut through the tense air. Leo had appeared, stepping between her and the magistrate, his smile easy, but his eyes like flint. Her stage is the sky, not a rich man's parlor. The magistrate's face had purpled. To be denied was an insult. To be denied by a common circus performer, a carny in defense of a girl he considered his for the taking, that was an unforgivable humiliation. His rage was not loud. It was a cold, terrifying thing. "Is that so?" he'd whispered. He didn't look at Lila again. His entire venomous focus was on Leo. Then you can teach her a lesson on the price of such lofty art. It happened so fast. Croft's men who had been lurking in the shadows seized Leo. They were not aiming for a stage. They dragged him toward the roaring bonfire that the troop used for warmth and community, the very heart of their camp. Lila screamed a thin, useless sound, swallowed by the night. She wanted to run, to fight, to throw herself in front of him, but her feet were lead fused to the earth by a terror so absolute it stole the breath from her lungs. She was paralyzed. Useless. Magistrate Croft calmly walked to the fire and, using a pair of tongs, pulled a long iron poker from the glowing heart of the embers. Its tip shone with a malevolent, white-hot light. Defiance is a fire. Croft had said, his voice conversational as he approached the struggling Leo. It must be met with a stronger flame. Leo fought, but there were 4 of them. They held him fast. He stopped struggling then and looked across the firelight, his gaze finding Lila's. There was no blame in his eyes. There was no anger. There was only a deep, shattering sorrow. A look that said, "I thought you were stronger than this little star." It was that look that finally broke her paralysis. She lunged forward, a wild cry torn from her throat. No stop. She was too late. She saw the poker descend. She heard the sickening hiss as it met flesh. A smell of burnt meat filled the air. Leo's body arched in agony, but he did not scream. He only grunted a single sharp sound of pain. As Lila reached them, one of Croft's men shoved her violently back. She stumbled, her arm flailing out to break her fall. Her wrist grazed the searing hot poker just as it was pulled away from Leo. The pain was a blinding, white-hot explosion. She shrieked, falling into the dirt, clutching her arm, the smell of her own burning skin mingling with Leo's. Her scar was not his. Hers was an accident, a glancing blow. His was a brand, a punishment for a crime she had been too afraid to commit herself. The Starlight Vagabonds were shattered that night. They scattered to the winds, a family broken by a single act of cruelty she had been too weak to prevent. Leo, his arm and his spirit maimed, had drifted away, his fire finally extinguished. Lila was left with nothing but a small puckered scar and a guilt that had become the hollow space where her heart used to be. The memory receded, leaving her trembling in the cold, dusty air of her wagon. She stared at her wrist, at the pale, silvery mark. A reminder. A debt. Barney's words came back to her. "Is your pride worth more than our lives?" She finally understood. It wasn't pride that was stopping her. It was penance. It was the ghost of Leo, his sorrowful eyes begging her not to make the same mistake again. The pain of walking that wire, the risk of a deadly fall, was nothing. Nothing compared to the slow, soul-rotting death of living with cowardice. A profound calm settled over her. The decision was made. She rose from the cot and walked to the table. She lifted the lid from the box and took out the length of white silk. It felt cool and heavy in her hands. The Baron had intended it as a shroud for her submission. She would make it her armor. She found her sewing kit, the small case of needles and thread that was as much a part of her trade as the chalk for her slippers. With slow, deliberate movements, she began to work. She did not rip or tear. She altered. She reinforced the seams, stitched new patterns into the fabric, not of adornment, but of strength. Each stitch was a vow. Each pull of the thread was a step toward repaying her long-overdue debt. She worked through the night, the world outside fading away, until there was only the needle, the thread, and her unwavering purpose. Just before dawn, a soft knock came at her door. "Lila." It was Barney. His voice was tired, resigned. Have you thought about it?" Lila put down her needle. The alterations were complete. She walked to the door and opened it. The man who stood before her looked haggard, his eyes pleading. She looked back at him, and for the first time in days he saw no fear in her face, no hesitation, only a quiet, absolute finality. "I have Barney," she said, her voice even and clear as a bell. "The show will go on." He saw the look in her eyes and knew with a sinking heart that there was nothing more to say. She had already stepped out onto the wire. The final night of the Meadows Edge traveling circus was not a celebration. It was a wake. The tent was packed standing room, only the suffocating press of bodies, a testament not to the show's popularity, but to the town's morbid curiosity. They had come to see a spectacle, an execution of spirit, if not of body. The air, thick with the smell of damp earth from a passing shower, vibrated with a dreadful silent tension. The usual roar of a Friday night crowd had been replaced by a low, anxious murmur, the sound of a hive about to be disturbed. Backstage in the cramped, chaotic world behind the curtain, the fear was a physical presence. Performers moved through their routines with brittle smiles and hollow eyes. Every joke from the clowns landed with a thud. Every acrobat's leap seemed weighted with dread. They were all ghosts at their own feast. In her wagon, Lila was an island of profound calm in this sea of anxiety. The fear had burned out of her, leaving behind a core of cold, hard purpose. She moved with a deliberate, ritualistic grace. She took out the white silk costume. It was no longer the Baron's shroud. In the long, dark hours of the night, her needle had become a weapon of reclamation. She had reinforced the seam-stitched patterns of thorns and stars into the cuffs, transforming his symbol of ownership into her own armor. When she put it on, the silk felt cool and strong against her skin. It was a declaration. Barney found her there, a portrait of unnerving serenity. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling. "Lila, there's still time." He whispered, his voice a ragged plea. "We can pack the wagons. Slip out before he even knows we're gone. We can run." Lila turned from the mirror, her gaze clear and steady. The girl he had begged the night before was gone. In her place was a woman made of wire and will. "Running is what he expects, Barney," she said softly. "It's another way of letting him win. We don't run tonight." Her calmness terrified him more than her fear had. He saw the finality in her eyes, the acceptance of a fate she was choosing to meet on her own terms, and he knew there was nothing more to say. He simply nodded a single defeated gesture and retreated into the chaos of the failing show. The first half of the performance was a blur of strained acts and muted applause. The audience was waiting. Every eye kept flicking to the empty velvet-draped chair in the center of the front row. The Baron was making them wait, letting the tension build until it was a palpable thing, a beast breathing in the dark. Then, just as the acrobats were taking their final strained bow, he arrived. The tent flaps were thrown open and Baron Augustus Thorne made his entrance. He moved with an unhurried, arrogant grace, his presence sucking the very air from the tent. He soaked in the fear, the focused attention, a monarch surveying his terrified subjects. He sat, and a complete, deathly hush fell over the crowd. The showdown had begun. And now, Barney's voice trembled as he read from his card for the Queen of the High Wire, the celestial dancer, Miss Lila Monroe. Lila walked out into the light. She did not look at the crowd. She did not look at the Baron. Her gaze was fixed on the single silver line waiting for her in the sky. Dressed in her altered white costume, she looked less like a circus performer and more like a priestess approaching an altar. She ascended the ladder, her movements fluid and sure. A collective sigh of confusion and relief rippled through the audience. The safety net was still there, stretched taut and wide beneath the wire. She had defied him. She had refused his command. She was going to perform, but on her terms. It was a small victory, but in the oppressive atmosphere, it felt monumental. Lila reached the platform. She took a moment chalking her slippers, her breathing slow and even. She was centering herself, gathering her strength for the dance. She was a queen on her lonely throne about to address her kingdom. She placed one foot forward, ready to step out onto the wire. Stop. The voice was a whip crack, a roar of pure authority that brought every heart to a standstill. The Baron was on his feet, his face a mask of theatrical fury. The entire tent froze, a tableau of shock. It seems he boomed his voice, dripping with condescending venom. Our little songbird has a defiant heart. She believes she can choose the terms of her performance. He let out a short, ugly laugh. She is mistaken. He pointed a gloved finger at the wire. I did not ask for a performance. I commanded one. And when my commands are not followed, a lesson in obedience is required. His cold gaze swept from Lila, frozen on the platform, to the horrified face of Barney Fitch. Fitch, remove the net. Barney stared, his mouth agape. Baron, I cannot. Now, Thorne roared, and two of his men moved immediately to the thick ropes, holding the net knives flashing in their hands. The crowd gasped, a wave of horror washing over them. But the Baron was not finished. His smile was a predator's smile, a thing of terrible, delighted cruelty. He looked back up at Lila, a final devastating judgment in his eyes. And you, he called to his other men, pointing at Lila with a flourish. Bring her down here. If she values her hands so much for her art, she will learn to perform without them. The Baron's command echoed, and the world held its breath. Then the flash of steel. Lila watched from her high perch as the knives sliced through the thick ropes of the safety net. It did not fall gracefully. It collapsed, a heavy tangled mass of hemp that hit the sawdust floor with a dull final thud. The sound was the closing of a coffin lid. A wave of pure, unadulterated horror washed over the crowd, silencing the initial shouts and replacing them with a sound that was somehow worse. A vast, collective gasp, the sound of 1,000 people realizing they were about to witness a murder. The Baron's men were already ascending the ladder for her. They were not circus hands. Their movements were rough, efficient, their hands hard and calloused from holding cudgels, not ropes. They grabbed her, their fingers digging into her arms, and dragged her from the platform. The humiliation was a fire in her veins. Being paraded like a common criminal, a piece of property to be disposed of. Down on the sawdust floor in the center of the ring, they held her fast. The Baron approached a ringmaster presiding over his own cruel circus. A lesson must be taught. He said, his voice loud enough for the first few rows to hear. When one defies a command, one loses the privilege of free hands. The greasy rope from the night before was produced. They wrenched her arms behind her back, the friction of the hemp searing her skin. The rope bit deep, a familiar violation. The memory of Leo's agonized face, the smell of burning flesh, flooded her senses. She felt the same paralysis, the same icy terror that had frozen her all those years ago. No, a voice screamed from the depths of her soul. Not again. This time she did not fight the fear. She channeled it. It became a river of ice in her veins, washing away the heat of panic, leaving behind a cold, hard, diamond-sharp resolve. She was forced back up the ladder, prodded from behind like cattle. She ascended into the glare of the lamps. The platform felt smaller now, a precipice at the edge of the world. She stood there, bound her slight frame a defiant silhouette against the darkness. The crowd was a blur of pale, horrified faces. She stepped out onto the wire. The initial shock was a physical blow. The world tilted, a violent, nauseating lurch as the wire swayed beneath her untempered weight. Her body, robbed of its primary tools of balance, screamed in protest. Every muscle, every nerve, every instinct, honed over a lifetime, shrieked at her to throw out her arms to grasp for something that wasn't there. She wobbled, her ankle twisting. A collective cry rose from the crowd below. For a terrifying second, she was falling. She saw the hard-packed earth rushing up to meet her. The wire never lies, Lila. You can't fool it. So you must learn not to fool yourself. Leo's voice, a ghost in her ear, a memory that was not a chain but an anchor. She closed her eyes. She let go of the dance. She let go of Grace. She let go of everything but the cold, hard reality of the wire beneath her slippers and the burning debt in her soul. She was not a performer anymore. She was a survivor. She bent her knees, sinking low, her thighs burning with the effort. Her world shrank to the few inches of rope in front of her. She did not walk. She shuffled. An inch. Another. Her body trembled from the sheer agonizing strain. It was not pretty. It was not art. It was ugly and desperate and the most beautiful thing the crowd had ever seen. They saw the truth. They saw a woman bound and shackled, stripped of every advantage, refusing to fall. They saw the sweat beading on her brow, the grimace of pain and effort on her face, the raw, indomitable will that held her suspended between life and death. And in her struggle they finally saw their own. A blacksmith in the third row, a mountain of a man who had been bled dry by the Baron's taxes for years, felt a hot rage that had long been dormant stir in his belly. He rose slowly to his feet, his massive fists clenched at his sides. A woman who ran the town's bakery, a widow, shamed by the Baron for daring to ask for fair payment, pulled her children close and whispered, "Don't look away. You watch her. You remember this." A single voice, clear and sharp, cut through the tension. "Devil!" it screamed. But it was not aimed at Lila. It was aimed at the Baron. The word was a spark. The tinder of the town's long, simmering resentment ignited. Another voice joined in, "Tyrant," then another, and another, until the entire tent was a roaring inferno of sound. "Shame! Shame! Leave her be!" The beast had awakened. Men and women surged to their feet, their individual fears burning away in the heat of their shared fury. They pushed against the flimsy ropes that separated them from the ring. The sound was a physical force, a tidal wave of righteous anger that slammed into the Baron. His face, which had been a mask of smug satisfaction, crumbled. Disbelief warred with fear. He had expected her to fall. He had expected the crowd to be cowed into silence. He had never in his life of absolute power anticipated this. He was no longer in control. "Stop them!" He shrieked at his guards, his voice thin and reedy with panic. "Get her down, you fools! Get her down now!" Lila heard none of it. She heard only the roaring in her ears and Leo's voice. "Just one more step, little star." She reached the opposite platform just as the first of the crowd's barriers splintered and broke. She did not land gracefully. She fell forward onto the rough wood, a heap of trembling, sobbing exhaustion, her body a single, screaming ache. Chaos erupted below. The crowd surged into the ring, a human tide sweeping away the Baron's authority. He and his men scrambled backwards, retreating in terror from the very people they had oppressed for so long. Circus hands rushed to Lila, their faces filled with a wild, tearful awe. One of them produced a knife and with a single swift motion cut the ropes that bound her wrists. The blood rushed back into her hands with a jolt of pins and needles. She pushed herself to her knees, her hands free but shaking uncontrollably. She looked out at the scene below. It was a riot, a revolution, a beautiful, glorious storm. And she was its quiet, deliberate, and victorious center. The roar of the crowd was the sound of a breaking dam. It washed over the sawdust ring, a cleansing flood of righteous fury that sent the Baron and his men scrambling into the darkness like rats from a sinking ship. They did not fight. They fled. Their authority, built on a foundation of fear, had crumbled the moment the people decided not to be afraid. Lila was helped to her feet by Barney and Marco the knife thrower. Her legs were trembling, her body a single screaming symphony of exhaustion and pain, but her eyes were clear. She looked out at the chaos she had unleashed at the townspeople, tearing down the Baron's velvet-draped chair at the roostaboots, defiantly relighting the lamps of the condemned tents. It was not a riot. It was a liberation. In the days that followed, a strange and wonderful new reality settled over the town. The fear was gone, replaced by a buzzing, cooperative energy. The Baron was gone, having tucked tail and fled to his fortified manor on the hill, but his power in the town was broken. His cronies went to ground, and the people for the first time began to speak in voices above a whisper. They rallied around the circus. The blacksmith, whose roar had been one of the first to join the rebellion, organized work parties to repair the unsafe tents. The baker's wife brought fresh bread every morning. The Meadow's Edge traveling circus, once an object of the town's pity and resentment, had become its heart, and Lila was its soul. She became a reluctant symbol, a quiet icon of defiance. People would stop her as she walked through the camp, not with demands, but with quiet, grateful nods. They would leave small gifts at the steps of her wagon, a wildflower, a polished stone, a hand-carved bird. They didn't need words. They understood what she had done, what she had risked. But a question lingered in the now clean air. What came next? The Baron was defeated, but not gone. The world outside this small, defiant valley was still the same. A week after the command performance, Barney came to her. He was a changed man. The weariness was still there, but the fear in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, steady pride. "We're leaving at the end of the week, Lila," he said. "The road calls." He paused, looking out at the revitalized camp. "But we're leaving different than we came. This town, you gave them their voice back." "They had it all along," Barney Lila replied softly, watching a group of children chase each other with joyful shrieks where the Baron's chair once sat. They just needed to remember how to use it. "Maybe so," he said. "We're having one last show. A farewell. The whole town is coming. They want to see you. One last time." He held his breath. "No one will tell you how to perform. It will be your choice, your stage." On the final night, the tent was filled not with tension but with celebration. The air was thick with the smell of fresh bread and roasted corn. Laughter echoed off the canvas walls. It was a festival of freedom. When Barney announced her name, the applause was thunderous. Lila ascended the ladder dressed in her altered white armor. She stepped onto the platform. The safety net was there, a testament to the care of her circus family. She looked down at the sea of smiling, upturned faces. They were not spectators, they were allies. She walked out onto the wire. Her hands were unbound. Her heart was light. She moved with a grace that was not born of practice, but of peace. It was not a dance of survival. It was a dance of joy. A celebration of a debt finally paid, of a ghost finally laid to rest. In the air, she was not running from the world. She was embracing it. When she reached the other side, the roar of the crowd was a song of gratitude. The next morning, as the sun crested the hills, the colorful wagons of the Meadow's Edge traveling circus began their slow procession out of the valley. They left behind a town that had found its courage. Lila sat on the step of her wagon, the morning sun warm on her face. She looked at the small, puckered scar on her wrist. For the first time in years, it didn't ache with the memory of guilt. It was just a scar, a part of a story that was at long last finished. The circus moved on, a family of vagabonds and dreamers, leaving behind one small spark of rebellion in the vast, unforgiving West, a testament that sometimes the quietest heart can start the loudest revolution. The silence of one woman's defiant stand on the high wire roared louder than 1,000 cannons, proving that courage doesn't need a voice. When faced with absolute tyranny, what's the one line you would never let anyone cross? If Lila's unbreakable spirit moved you, smash that like button and tell me in the comments, what does true courage look like to you? And if you think one woman's courage is a force of nature, wait until you meet our next hero. Next week, we step from the circus ring into the perfumed halls of the Silver Lily, a brothel built on secrets. There, a soiled dove named Pearl is the only person standing between a ruthless human trafficking ring and total control. She has the evidence, but they have her cornered. You won't want to miss this tale of espionage and survival in the darkest corners of the West. Subscribe now and ring that notification bell, because when the law is a lie, only the truth can set you free.